The door was centered under a dead fluorescent tube that still glowed like it had power. In the middle of the steel panel, someone had drawn a large X in chalk. Fresh, thick, and too clean for a corridor that hadn't been used in years. We hadn't brought chalk. 6 of us from a U.S. Recon element stood stacked on the right wall. Rifles down but ready, lights kept low. The air smelled of concrete dust and old electrical heat. I raised my hand and touched the X with a gloved fingertip. It smeared like it had been drawn minutes ago. Our team leader ordered a simple verification. Mark the frame, step through, count 10 seconds, step back out, and compare. No theatrics, just procedure. When we opened the door, the room behind it looked normal. Then we came back out and the chalk mark was already there exactly as before.
This channel documents frontline accounts like this one. Subscribe for future reports.
In 1986, our tasking out of Albuquerque was routine on paper. Verify and inventory a sealed service corridor beneath a federal facility slated for renovation. The access point had been flagged as restricted in an old maintenance log, but the drawings we were issued showed only a blank wall and a utility chase. No one could explain the discrepancy, only that the area hadn't been opened since the late 70s. We moved after midnight to avoid contractors and day staff. The corridor was dry, concrete block, exposed conduit, nothing exotic. A single steel door sat where the map insisted there was none. No placards, no serial plate, no handle shine from frequent use. Just that chalk X, bright against the gray metal, as if someone wanted it noticed. Our instructions were simple. Confirm the space, document what we could, and leave it secured. No delays, no questions, and no outside notifications. We started the way we always started. Small, controlled, repeatable. The team leader had me and Martinez handle the marking because we were the ones carrying the field notebook and camera. We didn't draw anything dramatic. We put 2 short chalk ticks on the inside of the door frame at shoulder height, and a third tick lower near the hinge. Something you could verify at a glance without arguing about angles. The big X on the door stayed where it was, centered and clean like a warning meant for the next person. First pass. Door opens inward. The room behind it is plain. Unfinished concrete, a low ceiling with conduit, a single junction box, and a floor that looked swept, not dusty. No equipment. No smell of fuel or chemicals. Just stale air and that faint electrical heat you get near old panels. We step in, count 10 seconds, step back out. The ticks are there. Normal. Second pass. Same drill, but we add a variable. We take a Polaroid of the chalk ticks and the X. Then Martinez adds a diagonal slash through our upper tick. We step in, count 10, step out. Our ticks are there, except the diagonal slash is gone. Not smudged, not half visible, just absent, like it was never drawn. The big X on the door is unchanged, still bright against the gray steel. We reset and repeat. Same result. A mistake like that would usually mean one of us was rushing or marking the wrong frame. So we simplified further. I put a single chalk dot on the frame, then pressed my gloved thumb into it to leave a print in the chalk dust. Martinez watched me do it. Lewis watched Martinez. Everyone saw it happen. We stepped through, counted, stepped out. The dot was back to a clean circle. No thumbprint, no smear. Same size, same position, same fresh look. It wasn't fading, it was restoring. At that point, the room itself became the subject, not the door. We cleared it like we would any unknown interior. Right corner, left corner, ceiling line, floor line. It stayed boring. Too boring. No loose grit, no spider webs, no drip stains. It looked maintained in a place that hadn't been used in years. I tried the oldest trick in the book. Drop something you can't argue with. A spent chem light casing, empty, no glow. It bounced once and rolled to the left wall, stopping near the junction box. Martinez called its position out loud. I wrote it down. We stepped back out, held the door open, and I pointed my light inside. The casing was gone. Not moved. Gone. The floor was clean where it had rolled, like it had never touched. I pushed the door wider and swept the beam across the same corner and the same wall. Nothing. No sound of it being kicked. No scrape. The men behind me shifted their weight in unison. A quiet signal that everyone had seen enough to stop pretending this was just a bad map. The team leader ordered a tight control. Nobody crosses the threshold unless told, and nobody touches the X. He had Lewis run a timing check. We didn't have digital kit out there, just watches. But 6 watches agreeing within a second was good enough for what we were doing. We did a timed entry. 10 seconds inside, 10 seconds outside, repeated in a fixed sequence. The room did not change. We did. On the 3rd cycle, I noticed my watch was behind Martinez's by almost a full minute. That shouldn't happen in a 10-second drill. Lewis called his time. Different again. Not drift. Not a second here or there. Full, clean offsets, as if we'd started at different hours. We brought the radio up low to check our external line. Our call went out clear, but the reply came back delayed. Same words, same cadence, like a recording sent through the net 1 beat late. Nothing in the transmission sounded distorted. It sounded copied. The team leader didn't like that. He ordered comms down to hand signals only. It was the first time that night his voice changed. Less routine, more contain. Martinez took the Polaroids we'd snapped and held them under his light. The images had developed, but the door panel was washed out in the center, like the camera refused to render the chalk X. You could see the edges of the door, the handle, the rivets. Everything except the mark that mattered. We tried again with a different angle. Same problem. The X was present to the eye, absent on the photo. Then the corridor itself started behaving like the room. We backed off 5 paces, put a strip of tape on the wall at shoulder height, and wrote a simple number on it in pencil. Just 1. No chalk, no symbols. We walked forward to the door, touched the handle, then walked back to the tape. The tape was still there. The number was not. I felt the temperature drop around my neck where my collar didn't seal. Not cold air. More like the sensation of being near a vent that shouldn't exist. The men behind me tightened their stack, rifles still down but no longer relaxed. The big X on the door looked brighter now only because everything else in that hallway seemed to dull, like the light was being taxed. The team leader gave one final instruction before we crossed again. 1 man in, 1 man out. Eyes on the marks. If anything resets, we lock it and we leave. He looked at me when he said it, because I'd been the one making the marks. And when I reached for the handle, I realized the chalk dust on my glove was gone, cleaned off like it had never been there. The team leader picked Lewis for the single-man entry. Lewis was steady, the kind who didn't narrate his own fear. He stepped to the door, kept his left hand on the frame, and pushed in slowly. Inside was the same plain room, same conduit, same junction box, same clean floor. Lewis moved 3 steps, stopped, and turned so we could see his chest rig and hands. The leader held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. Lewis nodded. I watched the chalk X on the door, not Lewis. It was the only thing in that corridor that behaved like it wanted to be noticed. At 90 seconds, Lewis raised his hand and pointed at the far left corner of the room, near where the chemlight casing had vanished. He didn't speak. He just pointed, then flattened his palm. Stop. The leader leaned in past the threshold, flashlight low, and swept the beam where Lewis was pointing. The corner wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't a person. It wasn't equipment. It was geometry that didn't match the room. An edge where there shouldn't be an edge. Like a second doorway pressed into the concrete. Perfectly aligned with our door, but facing the wrong direction. The beam didn't reflect off it the way it should. It swallowed the center of the light and left a dull halo around the outline. Lewis backed up 1 step, careful, and his boot crossed an invisible line. For a split second, his silhouette doubled, like the corridor had 2 versions of him layered out of sync. Then it snapped back. The leader signaled out. Lewis moved toward us, slow and controlled. He crossed the threshold and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. Martinez immediately chalked a simple line across Lewis's right glove, thick and obvious, while I watched. Lewis stood in the corridor for 10 seconds. We all watched the chalk line on his glove. It faded. Not rubbed, not smudged. It simply thinned until the glove looked clean again. The leader made the decision without debate. He pointed at the door, then drew an X in the air with his finger. Close it. Lewis pulled it shut. The chalk X on the door was still there, bright and centered, as if it had been waiting for that moment. Then, from the other side, something tapped back. 3 taps, evenly spaced, too deliberate to be settling metal. We froze. No one raised a weapon. No one spoke. The leader held up 1 finger. 1 more check, and leaned close enough to put his ear near the steel. A voice came through the door, low and flat, like it was traveling through a long duct. It was our own call sign, in our cadence, but none of us said it. We didn't open it again. The team leader ordered the corridor cleared in silence, single file. Lights down, no radio. Martinez took a final look at the chalk X and then wiped his glove on his pant leg as if the dust could contaminate him. Lewis kept his eyes forward, jaw tight like he was trying not to replay what he'd seen. At the first access ladder, 2 men went up to seal the hatch above us while the rest held security. We used the mechanical lockout and a heavy chain, then added a quick weld bead across the bracket, something you could spot later from 10 feet away. The whole time I kept expecting to hear those taps again through the concrete, like the door had learned we listened. Back at staging, the paperwork turned into the real operation. Our field notes were collected immediately. The Polaroids were taken, even the blank ones. A technician in a gray coverall checked our hands under a light, not for blood but for residue, chalk, dust, anything that could be traced. He swabbed my fingertips and sealed the sample without telling me what test it was for. We were told to shower twice before leaving the site. No jokes, no casual talk, just instructions. Before dawn, an admin rep met us with a single-page form. It didn't describe a loop room or a door with a chalk X. It described unauthorized markings and access control deviations, as if the only problem was procedure. We were required to sign that we had entered a restricted service area and observed nothing requiring further action. Lewis didn't want to sign. The team leader signed first, then looked at Lewis until he did. Our next assignment was moved up by weeks. Different location, different job, no explanation. And when I asked quietly what would happen to the corridor, the only answer I got was, access ended. I kept one thing I shouldn't have, a faint chalk smear on the cuff of my glove that the wash didn't fully remove. Months later, I checked the renovation schedule through a friend in facilities. The sub-level project in that section was canceled without cause and refiled under a different designation number. No one mentioned the door again. No incident report circulated, no safety bulletin, nothing official. But once in a secure comms room, I heard our call sign come over a speaker, low, flat, and delayed, followed by 3 evenly spaced taps like knuckles on steel. Then the channel went dead, and the log showed an empty line where the entry should have been.